Young Generation to go, and he's in. It's Mr. Minstrel, restive in the stalls, appeals, but they're under orders, and they're away. And Mr. Minstrel breaks fast in the blinkers. Spot him third from the left of the picture. Bolide towards the far left. Hard green on the far side. Haddon in between Mr. Minstrel and hard green. And it's Mr. Minstrel from Bolide. Hard green. Kris just in behind Bolide. Then behind them come Haddon. Then Cruise Hill on the far side. Young Generation tucked in on the near side. That's the left of the picture running up the rail. And it's Bolide and Mr. Minstrel from Kris and hard green and Haddon. And then Young Generation as they race down now towards the half-mile mark in the Greenham. Mr. Minstrel from Bolide, Haddon, hard green on the outside, Kris just in behind the leaders. Young Generation is tracking Kris. Cruise Hill's towards the outside. They're coming down towards the three-pole now, and as they do so, it's Mr. Minstrel being chased now by Kris in second and hard green third on the outside. Just in behind them, Bolide on the near side. Young Generation's making progress. Sanford's in behind the leaders. They're coming to the 2 mark now, and as they do so, it's Mr. Minstrel under pressure, and Kris taking it up now, but being chased by Young Generation, and it's Kris now from Young Generation as they race towards the furlong pole in the Greenham. Kris from Young Generation, Joe Mercer from Starkey, and Young Generation putting in a great challenge on the far side. Kris on the near side, Young Generation on the far side. There's nothing between the two. Young Generation getting the upper hand on the far side, but Kris fighting back, and as they come towards the line, Kris is lengthening his stride like a good horse and striding away to win it comfortably. Kris wins it from Young Generation second, and Marquis Universal third, and 4 Sanford. Then came Bolide and Haddon behind them, Mr. Minstrel and hard green, and last was Cruise Hill. And so the result of the Clerical Medical Greenham is first number 10, Kris, owned by Lord Howard of Walden, trained by Henry Cecil and written by Joe Mercer. Second was number 17, Young Generation, owned by Mr. A.P. Ward and Mr. J. Wyble, trained by Guy Harbert and written by Starkey. And third was number 13, Marquis Universal, owned by Mr. K. Sue and Mr. Khalifa Sassi, trained by Barry Hills and written by Steve Cawthon. And Young Generation immediately gets a 7-1 quote for the 2,000 guineas from the tote, and Kris has made a 4-1 chance with Ladbrokes, 5 with Hills. Here's how he won it, as we see it again with Julian Wilson.
Well, he certainly won it pretty well in the end, but you'll see here he's 2 off the rails, and Young Generation at this point was trying to make his challenge towards the rails, in fact following the leader through. At this point, in fact, he's just tracking Kris at this point, Young Generation. On the rails, Mr. Minstrel's weakening. Bolide hasn't got any room on the rails at all. And you see that Joe Mercer brings Kris over on toward the rails at this point. At this stage, Starkey thinks he's going to make his challenge on the inside, but here he changes his mind and realises he'll have to go and make his challenge on the outside. I think that Kris was far enough in front of him to have not caused any interference, but of course after what happened last weekend, you can't be sure. Coming to the furlong, Joe's gone for his whip on Kris, and Young Generation looks a real danger because Starkey hasn't picked up his whip at this point. Here he pulls it through, and with the rails to help him, Kris, he runs on. Young Generation, who was thought to need a race, has come to the end of his tether, and I think this race is going to bring him on a lot. Kris is a good winner on the day, but I'm not by any means convinced that he'll beat Young Generation again in the 2,000 guineas. I think this was a really good trial, and the first 2 have drawn a long way in front of the 3rd horse, Marquis Universal, and